Welcome to Bicky Bones Presents, where the shadows tell stories and the truth refuses to stay buried. From chilling confessions to unsolved mysteries, we dig deep into the darkest crimes to bring you the facts that others leave behind. Bicky Bones Presents, getting to the bare bones of it.
All right, let's jump into another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at the case of Mandy Mae Jackson.
Okay.
So she is currently serving time for murder.
Right.
But some people believe she was actually framed. So we've got news articles, we've got a podcast called The Angel at the Starlight Motel that's reinvestigating everything, and even a book by an anonymous author who claims to know Mandy personally.
Oh, wow. It's really interesting how you have these different sources that are all painting very different pictures of her.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the news portraying her as this manipulative femme fatale,
Right.
but then you have the book and the podcast sort of presenting her as this innocent victim.
Right.
You know?
It really makes you wonder, how much of what we believe about true crime cases is actually just the story that's being presented to us.
Absolutely. And how easily those narratives can be twisted.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so to get us started, let's rewind back to December 2016. This is where it all began. James Mulrenin. He was a strip club manager in Orlando, and he was found dead after falling from his apartment balcony.
So initially, the police ruled it as a suicide,
Yeah.
which,
Yeah.
on the surface, might have seemed plausible,
Right.
but then they discover a gunshot wound on his leg.
Oh, wow.
And all of a sudden, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, it changes everything.
Exactly.
Oh.
The investigation shifts from suicide to homicide. And that's when things really start to get complicated.
Okay, so that's where Mandy Mae Jackson enters the picture, and her boyfriend, Scott Michael Love.
Right.
Now, Mandy, she was a dancer who had actually applied to work at Mulrenin's club, which was called The Dollhouse, and she and Scott quickly become the prime suspects.
Yeah, and the news at the time really ran with this whole narrative of like a heated struggle gone wrong.
Right.
There were reports of bloody zip ties and duct tape found at the scene, cash missing from Mulrenin's apartment.
Oh, wow.
And to top it all off, Mandy and Scott were actually caught using his credit cards.
It sounds like a classic, open and shut case. But that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting, because there's this whole other side of the story
Absolutely.
that's being presented by the Angel at the Starlight Motel podcast and this anonymous author.
Right, and they're claiming that the evidence that was presented at Mandy's trial, while it seemed very damning, at the time,
Yeah,
doesn't actually tell the whole story.
right.
We're talking about things like Mandy's presence at the crime scene, her relationship with Mulrenin,
Right.
which is portrayed as this sort of like sugar daddy situation.
Right.
And of course the missing cash and the credit card use.
Yeah.
Oh, and there were even bloody gloves presented as evidence.
Yeah.
But, the podcast and the book suggest that there's a lot more to it than that.
So are they implying that maybe the authorities overlooked or even manipulated some pieces of the puzzle?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In order to secure a conviction.
Wow.
The anonymous author, who again claims to have been close to Mandy, alleges some pretty serious misconduct on the part of the police.
Okay.
We're talking tampered video evidence, staged photographs of the bullet hole in Mulrenin's leg, and even a blood-stained sofa that completely vanished before it could be examined.
Wait, a missing sofa.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly suspicious.
It is very suspicious.
So what does the podcast have to say about all of this?
Well, the Angel at the Starlight Motel really does a deep dive into these allegations.
Okay.
They compare the official testimony from the trial with the claims that are made by the author
Right.
and other sources that they've uncovered. And they even question whether certain witnesses were pressured to lie about Mandy's familiarity with the dollhouse
Oh, wow.
and the people who worked there.
Now, we can't forget about Chris Dahl.
Right.
He's the drug dealer who seems to be connected to this whole mess.
Right.
How does he factor into all of this?
Well, based on the sources that you provided, it seems that Chris Dahl was supplying drugs to various strip clubs in Orlando, including the dollhouse.
Okay.
And it appears that Mandy got entangled in that world somehow.
Yeah. So it's possible that Mandy's connection to Dahl, and perhaps Mulrenin's knowledge of that connection, put her in a dangerous position.
It's definitely possible.
Do we know how deep Mandy's involvement was with Dahl's operation?
That's one of the many questions that the podcast tries to unravel.
Okay.
They suggest that she might have been delivering drug packages for him.
Wow.
But the extent of her involvement is still unclear.
Okay. So we've got a murder, we've got a possible frame-up, a mysterious missing sofa,
Right?
and a whole lot of questions surrounding Mandy's connection to the drug scene.
Right. And that's where the Angel at the Starlight Motel comes in. They're trying to sift through all this information and determine what's fact and what's fiction.
And that brings up a huge question for you, the listener. If Mandy was indeed framed, who benefits?
That's a great question.
And what possible motives could someone have had to go through such lengths to set her up?
Yeah, those are definitely things we're going to unpack as we delve deeper into this case. And trust me, the deeper we go, the more intriguing this story becomes. Yeah, I can't wait. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with more on the Mandy Jackson case.
Sounds good.
It really is a fascinating puzzle to try to figure this whole thing out, to try and understand, potential motives.
Yeah.
I think we need to take a closer look at all the players involved and how they're all connected.
Absolutely. And I think at the center of it all, we have Mandy, right? She's depicted in some sources as being quite ambitious, driven by financial gain.
Right.
And then you have Mulrenin, the strip club manager. And, the nature of their relationship seems to be a bit of a gray area.
Right. Some sources paint him as just like a sugar daddy figure in Mandy's life. But others suggest a more complicated dynamic.
Exactly. There are hints that maybe their connection was a bit more intense, perhaps even volatile at times. It's a layer of the story that definitely deserves further exploration.
Yeah. And then there's Scott Michael Love, Mandy's boyfriend. The news reports at the time really seemed to focus on Mandy almost making Scott an afterthought.
But the fact that he was convicted too suggests a much deeper involvement, doesn't it?
It does. And it's interesting because the sources that you've given me don't really delve that deeply into Scott's role, which is kind of intriguing. Was he an active participant in whatever happened that night?
Yeah.
Or was he just caught in the crossfire, so to speak?
Right. It really makes you wonder if someone saw an opportunity to manipulate the situation to their advantage.
Right.
Using Mandy and potentially Scott as scapegoats.
Yeah.
Especially with all of these allegations of police misconduct.
Exactly. That's a really critical point.
Right.
Because if evidence was tampered with,
Yeah.
if witnesses were coerced,
Yeah.
It calls the entire investigation into question.
Right. It's not just about one person's guilt or innocence.
It's not. It's about the integrity of the justice system itself.
But why would the police go to such lengths to frame Mandy? What could their motive possibly be?
That's where things get really murky. The anonymous author proposes a few different possibilities. Perhaps certain officers had personal ties to the strip club, or even to Mulrenin himself.
Oh, wow.
Maybe they were trying to protect someone higher up, someone with a lot of influence.
So it's conceivable that Mandy and Scott became convenient fall guys for a much larger conspiracy.
Yeah, a much larger conspiracy.
It's kind of a chilling thought.
It is. Yeah. It is. It makes you wonder what else might have been swept under the rug.
Yeah.
If authorities were willing to manipulate evidence in this case, what else might they be capable of?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the unsettling truths that podcasts like The Angel at the Starlight Motel really bring to light.
Yeah.
They force us to confront the possibility that maybe the official narrative isn't always the complete picture.
Right. They give a voice to those who might not otherwise have one.
Exactly. They empower us to question, what we think we know.
Okay, so let's talk specifics. What are some of the key pieces of evidence that the podcast, the anonymous author, flag as potentially problematic?
One of the most compelling arguments that they make revolves around the timeline of events that led up to Mulrenin's death.
The podcast really scrutinizes the surveillance footage from that night, questioning the lack of timestamps and suggesting that maybe certain segments were edited or rearranged to fit a particular narrative.
So they're suggesting that the video evidence could have been manipulated to make Mandy look guilty?
Exactly. And then you have the whole issue with that blood-stained sofa that mysteriously vanished from the crime scene.
Right.
According to the anonymous author, this sofa was like a crucial piece of evidence, potentially containing DNA or other forensic clues that could have exonerated Mandy.
It's almost too convenient, like someone deliberately tried to make that evidence disappear.
Right, that's the implication.
Right.
And then, of course, we can't overlook the allegation that a crime scene photo of the bullet hole was staged.
Right.
The author claims that the angle and the lighting in the photo just don't add up, suggesting a deliberate attempt to fabricate evidence.
This sounds like something out of a movie. doctored videos, missing furniture, staged photographs. It's hard to even know what to believe at this point.
It really is.
Yeah.
And let's not forget about the concerns that were raised about the witness testimonies.
Yeah.
You know, the podcast highlights some inconsistencies and suggests that some of the witnesses, particularly those who worked at the dollhouse, might have been pressured by the police
Oh, wow.
to downplay Mandy's familiarity with the club and its employees.
So they're implying that the police might have coerced these witnesses
Yes.
to paint Mandy in a negative light.
Exactly. And it raises some serious questions about the reliability of those testimonies and the tactics that were used during the investigation.
Right. This is all incredibly complex and disturbing. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to circle back to Chris Dahl. We know he was a drug dealer connected to the dollhouse and other clubs.
Right.
What was his relationship with Mandy, and how did he factor into the events leading up to Mulrenin's death?
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Yeah.
You know? The more we learn, the more questions we have. Going back to Mandy's connection with Chris Dahl, do we know for sure that Mulrenin knew about it? That's one of the big unknowns in this case. The sources that you provided don't offer a definitive answer,
Right.
but it's definitely a possibility worth considering.
Yeah.
You know, if Mulrenin was aware of Mandy's involvement with Dahl, it adds another layer of complexity to their relationship
Yeah.
and potentially to his death.
Right. And it makes you wonder if Mandy was truly like a willing participant in this whole world
Right.
of drugs and strip clubs, or if she was manipulated or even coerced into playing a role that she didn't fully understand.
That's a question that the podcast grapples with as well.
Hmm.
They even interview Mandy's sister, Jessica, who offers some insights into Mandy's personality and motivations.
What kind of picture does Jessica paint of her sister?
Well, she describes Mandy as someone who craved love and attention, perhaps to a fault, and suggests that maybe she was drawn to the excitement, the allure of Dahl's world,
Right.
but ultimately lacked the street smarts to navigate it safely.
It's tragic. You know, if that's the case, it seems like she was a vulnerable young woman who got caught up in something that she couldn't handle.
That's certainly one interpretation.
Yeah.
But there is still some unanswered questions
Right.
that make it difficult to fully embrace that narrative.
Like the missing $2,500.
Right.
And the fact that Mandy and Scott were caught using Mulrenin's credit cards.
Exactly.
That seems pretty damning, doesn't it?
It does on the surface.
Right.
But the podcast raises some interesting points about that evidence.
Okay.
You know, they question whether the $2,500 was actually missing or if it was planted to make Mandy look guilty.
Oh, wow.
And they even suggest that someone else might have given those credit cards to Mandy and Scott, knowing that it would tie them to the crime scene.
Hold on. So they're saying that the evidence against Mandy and Scott could have been planted.
That's what they're suggesting. And it aligns with their overall argument.
Yeah.
That there was a deliberate effort to frame Mandy,
Right.
regardless of the truth.
Okay. So let's recap for a moment. We've got potentially doctored videos, a missing sofa, possibly staged photographs, questions surrounding the witness testimonies, and now the suggestion of planted evidence. It's almost overwhelming.
It is. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And it highlights a really crucial point. In cases like this, it's rarely about clear-cut guilt or innocence.
Right.
It's about sifting through these layers of information,
Yeah.
you know, conflicting accounts, potential biases, to get as close to the truth as possible.
And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It forces us to confront the complexities of the justice system and, you know, the human element that inevitably influences every investigation.
Absolutely.
We may never know for certain what happened that night in Mulrenin's apartment, but by examining all sides of the story, by questioning assumptions, by questioning motives, we can at least begin to form our own conclusions.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of podcasts like The Angel at the Starlight Motel. You know, they don't offer easy answers. They challenge us to engage in critical thinking, to weigh the evidence, and to recognize that truth is often subjective, a matter of perspective.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with more questions than answers. Was Mandy Mae Jackson a cold-hearted killer?
Right?
Was she a naive pawn? Or was she somewhere in between? The truth, as they say, is out there.
It is. And for those of you who are intrigued by this case, I highly recommend checking out the Angel at the Starlight Motel podcast.
Yeah.
It's a well-researched, thought-provoking podcast that really delves deep into the intricacies of the case and leaves you pondering the very nature of justice.
It's a long one, though, so just a heads up. Buckle up.
Yeah, it is.
And prepare to have your assumptions challenged. And as you're listening, ask yourself, what would you have done in Mandy's shoes? Who would you have trusted? And most importantly, what does justice truly mean in a case like this, where the line between guilt and innocence is so blurry?
Such great questions. This deep dive really reminds us that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, a constant quest for truth that requires a critical eye, empathy, and a willingness to question everything we think we know.
Keep those minds open and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time.
Thanks for watching Bicky Bones Presents. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and like the video. It won't cost you a thing, for now. But remember, the price of staying in the shadows is loyalty. See you in the dark corners next time.